This is ContactTalkRadio.com, consciousness in action, and you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, SHERI Horn Hasan of Karmic Evolution Astrology. Today, because again today, I have a lot to say. So, enough said. First, little housekeeping stuff. You can listen to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking anytime by simply going to my website at karmicevolution.com, clicking on the upper right-hand portion of the banner radio show, and there you can scroll down the page and hear the most recent show, either live or recorded, and or search the archive list for past shows that you might have missed or that you want to listen to again. So separately also, you can follow me on my Facebook page. That's Karmic Evolution for your street, or you can for my conversations about consciousness. Hang on a second. Okay, separately, and finally, sorry, I was a little distracted there. I was hearing a lot of noise. I'm offering still my 1-hour discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading to my listeners for only $99. And this is for those who want to gain greater consciousness about their soul's true mission and purpose in this lifetime, who want to move from chaos to clarity in terms of relationships, career, finances, and or health, to heal old karmic wounds and co-create their own future happiness and success, and finally to awaken to your true potential and highest destiny in this lifetime. I like to say that's easy when you take advantage of my special discounted offer for listeners only, a 1-hour Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $99. Simply email me at SHERI, that's SHERI, at karmicevolution.com and book your reading today. At almost half the regular price, conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable. Okay, so let's get on to this week's Astro News you can use. All right, so where are we, right? We've now got Pluto, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mercury direct, leaving only Uranus and Neptune still in retrograde motion. Uranus won't station direct again until January 18th of 2022, although Neptune makes his about face December 1st of this year. Wounded healer Chiron, which is currently transiting through Aries, also stations direct on December 19th, and that happens to be the same day that Venus will station retrograde. But we're going to talk more about that on a future show. Right now, any way you slice it, most of the major planets are moving forward once again, signaling that it's all systems go, and the period for slowing down, going inward, revisiting issues, revising them, and making new or more realistic plans is now at hand. And this is especially true as related to our internal sense of empowerment, since Pluto stationed direct in Capricorn October 6th and our internal sense of security, especially as it relates to work or what we do for a living or how we sustain ourselves, since Saturn stationed direct in Aquarius October 10. Also, we may begin to expand our future plans now as Jupiter just stationed direct in Aquarius October 17th or 18th, depending on your time zone, and Mercury is now direct in Libra since October 18th, and this will reflect how we handle agreements between ourselves and our partners. And some of these agreements may have been renegotiated, rediscussed, revised, rewritten, etc. during the Mercury retrograde period. So all of this direct movement provides hope for some of the mundane issues that have been plaguing the world, such as backups at U.S. and other international cargo ports that may leave shelves far emptier than usual at holiday season this year. We hope now that Mercury's direct, and as I mentioned last week, now that one of the U.S.'s largest ports, the port of Los Angeles and Long Beach, is now operating 24/7, that this will clear the logjam of cargo containers off the docks so that those ships idling outside the port can finally dock and unload. Now, this requires that efforts to recruit enough truckers to move those containers out of the port to make way for new ones prove successful. So remember, Mercury's transportation, especially transportation that serves local destinations. So truckers are usually, there are cross-country truckers, of course, but most of trucking is used to move goods out of places like a port to go to a local destination, which is usually a warehouse. And from there, the retailer owns the warehouse. They then distribute through their means, usually truckers. Rails also come into the port, so that's included. But they move things both short and long distances. But a lot of it is, not just long distance. So that's something to keep in mind. So Mercury's still in its shadow period, though, until it hits the degree at which it's stationed retrograde, which was 25 degrees and 26 minutes of Libra, and that won't occur until November 3rd. Now, it's my guess that between now and then, things will slowly get rolling, and we will begin to see real results sometime in November and December, though that still may not be enough time for everything to arrive on store shelves for the holidays. And if that's the case, retailers may end up taking a bit of a hit through having to sell goods at a discount after the holidays, but we'll see. I talked last week a little bit about stagflation and stuff like that. So I guess if what I'm saying does actually prove to be true, that discounted prices will, help people out a lot. But who knows? Retailers are wily ones. We don't know. They got to make a profit, right? So meanwhile, Jupiter's stationed direct, especially in the sign of humanitarian-oriented legislation, which is Aquarius. And since Jupiter naturally rules the ninth house of law, this direct station may bring broader applications of legal legislation, such as the Voting Rights Act bill, which just this week was stymied in the Senate when it could not reach passage through a mandated majority 60% vote. 100 senators in the Senate require a 60% vote to pass a piece of legislation. Now, what I'm going to say may sound a little more dire, but it occurs to me that what I've just said about the Mercury retrograde period and the Jupiter station direct, that, it may take until November or December for us to see real movement on this Voting Rights Act bill, which I'm going to explain in a minute, requires the putting aside of the filibuster, which is the requirement of a 60% majority vote in the Senate, making it a majority vote only, so it could go 51 to 49, right, or 50-50, and the vice president gets the breaking tie. And since she's of the party that has proposed this legislation, it would pass with her vote. But right now, if you look at this astrologically, we know that the recent Aries full moon, which occurred just yesterday, brought us a meetup of the Aries moon and Eris. And Eris is the goddess of discord and chaos, and both of them oppose the Libra sun and Mars. So this alone was likely to bring some confusion as to how we move forward, not only legislatively, but that's a good place to start to see an illustration of this energy on the level of the collective, and at least here in the United States. So the real trouble occurs because Mars was waxing into a square to Pluto, which had already been squared by both luminaries prior to the exact Aries full moon lunation, which occurred approximately 10:30 a.m. yesterday, October 20th. But the Mars-Pluto square actually perfects today, October 21st, and and the 22nd, depending on your time zone, it's 9:20 p.m. tonight, October 21st, on the West Coast, Pacific time, and it is 12:20 a.m. on Friday, October 22nd, on the East Coast. So we're still under, right now as I speak, the auspices of this energy, which is waxing, right? And if we take this T-square all together, Moon Aries, opposite the Libra Sun and Aries, opposite the Libra Sun and Mars, and all of them square to Pluto in Capricorn. This Aries full moon highlighted the struggle of negotiating with partners as a way to successfully move toward greater self-empowerment. And I don't think I'm mixing apples and oranges here, because no matter where one stands on the actual, when we go back to the Voting Rights Act that I started to speak about, where one stands on the actual legislative issues, we can see that disagreements abound, right? Disagreement is in the air everywhere. It's in the water. It's in the air we breathe right now. I mean, it's, from everything from mask mandates in school, mandated vaccines on the health issue, and all this legislation, Biden's Build Back America soft infrastructure, which is holding up the transportation infrastructure bill, right? We really can see that, the word stagflation, which I used last week, that relates to the price and the cost of goods and services. Stagflation has been felt here in other ways right now. So the question becomes, where is there disagreement over a final compromise in our personal lives, right? As above, so below. It's mirrored back to us in the collective, and then we can try to extrapolate down from that into our personal lives. And are we even aware of the energies now calling us to stand up and fight? And if so, what kind of empowerment are we fighting for? So where we fall on this score may not be obvious to us all, but it's important to recognize that each individual makes up the energies of the collective, and that collective happenings show these energies to us on a grander scale, as I just said. So it's up to each of us to decide if empowerment is an issue in our lives right now. Mars square Pluto, which will perfect tonight, tomorrow morning, is a ruthless energy. It says that we may have to fight to get what we want. But the problem is, actually says that we have to fight to survive. But the problem lies in deciding what's worth fighting for. We can get a lot of work done now because we have a lot of energy. Mars is an ego energy, but what we're working on may well result in a great deal of tension because it arouses opposition, which in turn causes confrontation. Since we can see this again on a grander scale pretty much anywhere we look right now, but nowhere more prominently than here in the US, over issues like the Voting Rights Act bill, which seeks to protect every US citizen's right to vote, regardless of restrictive state laws being passed to change or eliminate this right by making it harder to vote, right? So, we need to, again, take note of that, extrapolate it down into our personal lives, and realize that that issue touches every single citizen of the United States who is allowed to vote, but whose ability to do so is being restricted right now. So is this worth fighting for or not? The big question revolves around whether the Democrats, who hold a majority in Congress, albeit a slim one, and the administration, so both the House, the Senate, and the administration will do away with the filibuster, even if only for this one particular piece of legislation. And many are warning, if that does not happen, democracy here in this country is doomed. Now, doomed is a kind of Plutonic word when you think about it, right? Doomed to extinction. Jungian astrologer Liz Green always refers to Pluto transits as possessing a, and I quote, kill or be killed energy, right? She says you can kill or be killed, you can go down kicking and screaming, or you can go down easy, but something has to die in order for something new to be reborn. And when we look at Pluto in terms of indicating our capability to evolve in order to survive, we know that that clearly necessitates a fight, whether it's an internal or an external one. And that's what makes this past Aries new moon, along with the T-square formed by Mars opposition to chaotic, discordant Eris, while both square Pluto, so damn important. Now, lunations often act as triggers. Yes, we know it's a time to release, right? We need to release our dependence on feeling comfortable with negotiating and compromising, even if it doesn't get us ultimately what we want, which is something I talked about last week. So the lunations, while this is a time to release that, it's also that the lunations act as triggers, especially if they fall on sensitive planets or points within one's individual natal chart. So I decided to take a look at the U.S. natal chart, the one that's most used by astrologers and one I've mentioned before on this show, which is called the Sibley chart. And we can see that this lunation fell between the U.S.'s 4th and 10th houses and squared Pluto transiting currently through the U.S.'s 2nd house. So there's a parental quality called into play here, right? We're all citizens of a nation, so the nation is like our parent, because the 4th house represents our roots, family, and sense of emotional security, which is formed early in life. So early in the life of the formation of the United States of America was the inherent concept of democracy. One man, one vote. I mean, it's, yes, we had the Constitution and there have been changes to it and additions to it and all of that, but still it was the birth of democracy. And with the Aries moon and Eris here, we can see that the U.S. is emotionally upset right now because its sense of its real roots, right, or real family, has become chaotic and therefore confusing. And I don't think I have to mention the kinds of vehement emotions. Aries moon is emotional, right? When Aries moons are upset, they don't sit down and think about it. They don't rationalize it intellectually. They don't, go build something. They act out. They go take a run. I mean, a healthy Aries moon is going to go do some physical exercise to expel any anger or excess emotion that it feels. It's not just going to, sit there quietly and eat its milk and cookies and be placated by a parent saying, it's okay, everything's going to be okay. You don't have to be angry now. Now, Aries moon is going to kick and scream and go outside and throw rocks at trees and, scream at people or, whatever. So the best outlet for an Aries moon is to do something, but not something violent. Something that just allows them, as I said, to expel their emotional energy. So we've got a collective here in terms of the moon being in the 4th house during this particular Aries full moon lunation that's extremely emotional. And the efforts to vehemently express these emotions have been brewing clearly for quite some time. And the Libra Sun and Mars in the 10th house, which the moon opposes from the 4th, the 10th house is always concerned with our work and our reputation out in the world. So they're trying, or they tried valiantly to keep things copacetic, right? Because they're opposing Eris. Eris is like chaos, discord. Libra's like, okay, calm down, let's talk about this. So they're trying valiantly to keep things copacetic against the tidal wave of anger and Aries energy emerging from within the family, quote unquote, collective right now. And let's not forget that the moon, even though it was in the 4th house during this lunation, represents in mundane astrology the people. So the people are upset. And again, the people, which people? The people who come from the legacy of democracy at the formation of the United States. The people who are now citizens of the United States, whether they came here in the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, or 2000s, don't matter. So the people are upset regardless of which belief system they follow and what exactly it is that upsets them most. So we're not getting into that mundane argument of I believe in this and I believe in that. It's just that they're pissed. Whichever side of the argument they stand on, they're pissed. So the Libra Sun and Mars tries, like I said, to placate these emotionally discordant reactions of citizens while negotiating tricky territory that they hope can lead to compromise. Excuse me, just had to cough. I hope I covered my mic. But with Pluto approaching its return to the U.S. natal chart, which everybody's been talking about if you follow other astrologers, not just me, the Pluto return occurs at 27 degrees and 33 minutes of Capricorn in the U.S. second house of self-value and self-worth, and how this relates to what we have or what we own in terms of resources that provide also a sense of inner security. That happens in March of 2022. And the question becomes, are we emotionally capable of finding agreement over what's most important to the long-term survival, that's Pluto, of this nation? Areas of survival on the individual level are up for review now, as well as we're all coming out of this major planetary retrograde period. Do we move forward with a mission to ensure our individual survival? Or do we acquiesce to the powers that be, even if they demand we give up efforts to save our nation and our planet? And this is the challenge, the way that I see it, that's been presented to us all at this Aries full moon, which culminated yesterday, but is still in effect for, the next 2 weeks. It's strongest for the 48 hours after the exact lumination occurs. As I said, I think it was 10:37 a.m. on the East Coast, making it 7:37 a.m. on the West Coast yesterday, October 20th. So the answers lie in how we handle all of these energies moving forward. It would appear right now that in the name of harmony, the Libra Sun and Mars are falling prey to threats from those who hold power right now. Yes, I'm talking about the two U.S. senators, West Virginia's Joe Manchin and Arizona's Krysten Sinema, who hold, among other things, opposing views about the inclusion and passage of climate change legislation, as well as on voting rights, as well as on, they disagree, I'm sorry, I don't want to confuse it. They have opposing views about including climate change legislation as part of the $3.5 trillion original Build Back Better soft infrastructure bill proposed by the Biden administration. So Joe Manchin wants most of it watered down or taken out, primarily because he is affiliated with coal companies in West Virginia. And the move away from fossil fuels will obviously literally kill some of his business over the long term. And Krysten Sinema holds the opposite view, because the one thing she wants to remain in that bill is the climate change portion, because that's how she started some of her political career, by being a progressive who championed climate change legislation in order to protect this planet into the future. So they disagree on that, which automatically sets up a pretty, strong problem, because if both of them refuse to vote on this bill and we don't kill the filibuster, it's not going to pass. And then both of them also are against killing the filibuster, which requires 60 votes to pass the Voting Rights Act legislation. So without the Voting Rights Act legislation in place, the federal government can't override the tidal wave of restrictive state laws, as I said before, already passed or being considered by states. I think it's something like 300 or 400 something separate bills being considered by 43 states in this union that represent a diminution of individuals, particularly minorities power to have their votes count in U.S. elections. So what we're looking at here is a major, major game changer. And I just, I feel very strongly about this, which is one of the reasons I decided to do the show myself this week, because it's really, really an important issue. And let's remember, too, that even at the inception of the United States, whose birth chart, for those who want to look it up or run a chart, is July 4th, 1776 at 5:10 p.m. in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, that at that time, not all of the colonies were in alignment about breaking ties with the motherland. So the Declaration of Independence was not entirely backed by everyone who signed it. And there were several years of fighting after that. So it really began the Revolutionary War. I'm not a historian, so I don't have all those facts and details, but from what I understand, there's still a great deal of time before their mission was accomplished, right? So if they weren't in alignment about breaking ties with England, now, instead of breaking ties with an offshore monarchy that tries to rule our nation through things like taxation, right? Taxation without representation, we're looking at weakening the ability of this nation to function as the democracy it's evolved into over time, right? So what we're seeing is, and when I say that, the United States has evolved into the democracy that was envisioned by its founders, even though it's not the most perfect of democracies, right? So I think everybody can acknowledge that. But what we're seeing now is a recurrence of states fighting each other, which is what happened, even after 1776, July 4th, because, we've switched out fighting the British monarchy for now fighting the U.S. government that's existed for 200 and whatever years, right? 250 plus years. Well, it's 248 next year, I guess, because that's the Pluto return. So whether we're seeing a recurrence of states fighting each other, and after all, it's states that are represented in the U.S. legislative bodies, the House and the Senate, and or fighting the modern representative of the British monarchy, read the U.S. federal government, or both, I'll leave that to everybody to decide for themselves. However, I see this as a time of great upheaval, and part of that upheaval will be triggered further as a result of this particular lunation. As one pundit recently noted, and I'm quoting here, democracy is the foundation of this nation, and we're at a watershed moment. Okay, so I believe that moment has been particularly highlighted by the Moon Eris opposition to the Libra Sun Mars square Pluto, and that Pluto's square to Eris, which has been off and on this year, is Eris takes 100 years to go through a sign. So, she's been in Aries for most people born since the early part of this century. So Pluto and Eris squares are rare. And the times in history, which were discussed on the show in one of the shows with Daniel Fiverson, if anybody wants to look that up, I am going to plan on inviting him back so we can talk more about this. But the thing is that it's an energy that's, we won't even see the effects of it for a long time. So remember that, like I said about a lunation triggering things, it triggers the slower moving planets into action, or the energies of the slower moving planets into action. So, we don't always see that cause and effect unless we look back, and sometimes we have to look back pretty far. It just depends. So I, was just going to add, I think that if this energy, given this person's comment that we're at a watershed moment now, if we don't stand up to empower our own ability as citizens of the United States, for those who are listening who are citizens, to be able to vote fairly and equally, then there will be a potential down the road for eventual civil war. And again, that would be a recurrence of the energy from when the Pluto return occurs in March of 2022. All right. So the thing is that we can decide now on where we want to throw our support for things like the Voting Rights Act, which without getting into politics and whose argument, who has which argument and which one is right or wrong, we must protect the right to vote. It's very plain and simple. Other astrologers have pointed out, and we'll talk about this more in the future, that when Uranus goes into Gemini, which isn't for a while yet, it's 2025, I think, there's history of war. So I'll just leave you with that for now. But again, going back to the lunation and today's Mars square Pluto, evolution doesn't come easy. It's a struggle. Anyone who's experienced a Pluto transit to their sun or moon knows this. We have to die to be reborn, metaphorically. We have to fight to survive. That's the basic fundamental Pluto principle. And Pluto's stationed direct. If we don't, we become extinct, kaput, or done for all eternity. And again, it's my personal belief that if we don't take the proper actions, because we're clinging to the old paradigm espoused by people like Senator Joe Manchin, that everything must be decided by bipartisan agreement, even when the sides are so clearly and antagonistically drawn, and compromise seems impossible, that now is when it will all begin to fall apart, disintegrate, and die. And yes, again, I'm talking about democracy as the fundamental ruling principle in the United States of America. And I shudder to think what might replace democracy in this day and age of Uranian-inspired information gathering, as in spying, artificial intelligence, algorithms, etc., that may well replace one man, one vote with a different kind of autocratic decision-making, because we've decided to place this responsibility to make decisions about our lives onto technology. You notice that when we have recounts in these elections, whether we think that they were called for or not, they're done by hand. They're not done through technology, right? There's really no substitute for that. So, again, as we wait to see what the long-term effects, I mean, I'll be gone by the time the Pluto Aries square probably plays out, unless it's like, I don't know, 30, 40, 50, 100 years from now. So it's stuff that we can't necessarily see, but the Mars square Pluto and the lunation square Pluto is the trigger. So now let's get back to Jupiter station direct for a moment. Legislatively, as the U.S. Congress again battles to negotiate a final agreement on so many issues of relevance to our personal future, including climate change, healthcare, workers' rights, and so much more, the question becomes how much compromise will result in any of what the American people favor over how much big money, that's Pluto, and business, that's Saturn, will acquiesce to major transformative change, which is what both Pluto and Capricorn and Uranus and Taurus have been calling for. And the Biden administration's Build Back Better legislative plan clearly is undergoing major change and shrinkage right now, as of the time of this show, the most dire of which appears to be its backing down because of big business's lobbying efforts, Pluto's money and joint resources again, by big pharma, against Medicare's ability to negotiate lower drug prices to put the U.S. into greater alignment with the rest of the industrialized world in terms of how much they pay for their prescriptions, to fossil fuel companies' lobbyists balking at allowing climate change legislation to help save our planetary health over the long term. So these two majorly important issues, and I think they, as I've already indicated, I think they pale in comparison to the voting rights bill importance of that legislation. And there are others of importance in this Build Back Better social infrastructure legislation, including mandated government funding of universal pre-K, childcare, child tax credits, free immunity college education, paid family leave, and more, seem headed for a massive watering down as Congress fights now over how much is too much and how much will be enough to make even the slightest bit of difference over the long term. Again, I say none of this matters if we can't preserve our democracy by preserving every citizen's right to vote, because after all, it's our right to vote that places the people in the U.S. House of Representatives and in the U.S. Senate and in the White House, and the White House appoints the Department of Justice Attorney General, something that we all paid a lot more attention to during the Trump years, right, than normal. So if we want these things to pass, we have to preserve our right to vote so that we elect people who have a say in what we prefer. Now, that begs the question, which is also a big part of what I just mentioned, which is the squares to Pluto now, or Mars square Pluto and the luminaries at the Aries full moon, which is that Pluto is power and Pluto is money. So these lobbyists who are made up of, I read the other day a really interesting article that talked about how many staffers for congressmen and senators now work for big companies, both in the pharmaceutical industry, fossil fuels, places like Silicon Valley, places like Facebook and Google, any of the major corporations, the Fortune 500, they lobby for their industry, and they have inside access, a lot of them, to our legislators, and they give them money. So it's really money that motivates, the question here too, on an evolutionary scale, are we going to continue to allow money to motivate our elected officials, or are we going to demand that they represent us? Okay, and there again is a watershed moment. And without the right to vote, we can't achieve that either, right? Now, since Saturn stationed direct on October 10th, we've also had the issue, and I mentioned this last week, of 4.3 million workers deciding, presumably during the long outer planets retrogrades, to leave their jobs, many of them in the retail and hospitality services industry, such as places like restaurants and department stores or mom and pop stores, many of which went out of business during the pandemic. And as these folks search for new jobs, it remains to be seen if employers will be offering more money per hour and or better benefits in the long run. Now, some of this does seem to be occurring now, though it remains to be seen whether this will last for the long term. And there's a lot of talk now about expanded employee empowerment in terms of demanding higher wages, better working conditions, more perks, paid family leave, etc. Not to mention continued attempts to unionize by gig workers and those who toil in Amazon-type factories without any real rights. So we're seeing a resurgence in the strength of unions, and history has proven this to be favorable in terms of worker protections overall. And I believe this is related to, especially now that Saturn's direct again, the Saturn Uranus square dance that's been going on since February of this year. So I'll remind you again that on December 24th, Saturn in Aquarius makes its final and third exact square to Uranus and Taurus, and that the effects of this energy may well last for more than a decade until Saturn makes his next conjunction to Uranus at approximately 28 degrees Gemini, which occurs circa June 28th, 2032. So we're talking a long time, almost 11 years, right? So a Saturn-Uranus synodic cycle, which is the time it takes from the conjunction of Saturn or the meetup of Saturn, the faster moving planet, with Uranus until their next meetup, lasts approximately 45 years. The last synodic cycle of Saturn to Uranus began at 0 degrees Capricorn, circa mid-February 1988. So if we think back, and we know that Saturn's related to both work, business, and the corporate hierarchy, working our way up the corporate ladder, we may remember that former President Ronald Reagan's huge push to deregulate many industries, which were governmentally regulated, began with his tenure in 1981 and ended when his tenure ended in 1989. and that it began to have an effect on workers during that time and workers' relationships to their employers. Now, many of us may remember that Reagan fired most of the 13,000 members of the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization, known as PATCO, which is a trade union, in August of 1981, or early in his term. And clearly the movement of manufacturing jobs overseas and the loss of American jobs increased during Reagan's tenure. I'm not going to say that it caused it entirely, because I do think there were things happening economically in the 70s, but I'm not, not well versed in that, so I'm not going to go into that. However, it definitely hastened it. So that's not to say that unionization doesn't have its drawbacks. While it holds corporate owners and operators responsible for worker safety and health, some unions have become so strong that they wield great political power, or too much political power. And there are pros and cons to this, of course. But when a union backs a political candidate, it can sway an election. On the other hand, when unions demand demands for things like unqualified police immunity protect too many dirty cops who break the law, then the strength of such unions can prove detrimental to the public in general. Most workers, however, unionize to force their corporate or nonprofit owners, and I'm thinking hospitals and teachers here, to be as responsible for their safety, welfare, and providing a living wage as owners expect workers to be responsible to produce its products and services. Now, as the sun moves into Pluto-ruled Scorpio tomorrow, October 22nd, all issues related to power, money, sex, and secrets come to the forefront even more over the next month. So remember, it's hard on the heels of this lunation and the Mars square Pluto, thus continuing the theme of empowerment highlighted so starkly at this Aries full moon. It's important to note a couple of things, one of which is that Venus in Sagittarius will square Neptune in Pisces next week on October 26th. So this energy definitely inspires our creativity, but it can also create difficulty as Venus in Sagittarius prizes her freedom, while Neptune in Pisces can float up to the ethers in terms of fantastical thinking about how to gain that freedom. So I'd watch for more attempts by people like Stephen Bannon, who's already defied a congressional subpoena to testify about January 6th, what he knew, when he knew it, what conversations he had with former President Trump and others leading up to that day, to wiggle out of appearing based on fantastic legal arguments that will ultimately be proved based on a dream only. We already know that he's made those cases just yesterday and the day before, since the, or actually within this past week, since the House just voted yesterday to hold him in contempt. So actually, I'm not sure. The committee voted on Tuesday to hold him in contempt, and I think the House, did they vote last night? I think they voted last night. I'm confused now because I don't remember if it was happening today or tomorrow, but it's going to happen because the Democrats rule the House. So, and then when Venus sextiles Jupiter on October 28th, it indicates that legal matters may work out favorably, but this is a fleeting transit. So it relates, so whether it relates to Mr. Bannon or not, or other people like Mark Meadows and Kash Patel, the people who are being subpoenaed, who are defying subpoenas, or in the process of negotiating with the House's subcommittee on the investigation of January 6th, it may indicate on a personal level a good time for our finances. However, we might feel a little bit lazy and more inclined to enjoy others' company and the pleasures of life rather than working hard at something. So, I don't know. I hope that people don't just sort of give up the good fight. Now, during the sun's transit through Scorpio, he'll square Saturn October 30th, which is next week, or 10 days from now approximately, a time when relations with authority figures may prove to be at a low, making it difficult to make progress, especially in any work-related endeavors. And this transit can reveal weaknesses in our ego structure for the purpose, or in order to show us where we must build up greater resources in order to gain greater self-confidence in the long run. And Mars enters Scorpio on October 30th as well, adding his energies to assisting the mission of the Scorpio sun to engage in transformational evolutionary change. We can hope that this will add some ammunition to our sense of empowerment once we recognize our weaknesses through the Sun square to Saturn. Both should aid us in making the kinds of changes necessary to move forward more successfully and more self-empowered now. I did want to mention too, just briefly, that I said money and power are two of the things that Pluto represents, and I mentioned sex as well. And I thought it was interesting because I paid attention to some of the comments that I've seen on the news lately, particularly dealing with the church. And now that Jupiter is moving forward, because the 9th house, which Jupiter rules naturally, and Sagittarius relate to religion, right? Jupiter relates to our belief system, and much of our belief system is formed by our religious beliefs. So I thought it was interesting because, there was some story about one of the evangelical pastors being kicked out. And I was listening to a discussion of this, and it made me think of, the separation of church and state, right? Which has been narrowed in many ways, but also legislatively, right? By our Supreme Court deciding cases about whether or not an adoption agency in, I think it was Pennsylvania, whether they could discriminate against people, same-sex couples adopting a child through a Christian nonprofit adoption service. And that followed a few years ago, the cake bakers who refused to serve clients that basically they didn't like, but who happened to be a same-sex couple who wanted a wedding cake. So I thought this was an interesting quote. A guy named Phil Nordstrom, who's an evangelical pastor, said, "The Bible Belt is unbuckling. The branding of Christianity has suffered. I think that our association with political extremism has especially turned off a younger generation toward evangelicalism." So one of the challenges we face right now is, who are we? What does it mean to be an evangelical? And he said, the funny thing is I'm probably pretty personally conservative, but we're a pretty inclusive church, that everyone's welcome, and that we're not trying to fight the culture wars from the pulpit. So I thought that was an interesting statement, again, about the separation between church and state. And, the interviewer pointed out that more people in recent years are identifying as evangelical, because we know that the evangelicals who put a lot of the Trump administration in power, yet fewer of them are going to church. And another pastor named Dr. Theodore Moore said, the word evangelical has become political. Once it's defined not by the gospel, but some sort of cultural or political purpose, then it's, it loses its meaning in people's personal lives. So I thought it was interesting because that's definitely related to Jupiter. Now I've got a few minutes left, and I was hoping to get to the charts of Krysten Sinema and Joe Manchin, but I think just because I have about 5 minutes or so left, I'm going to stick to Joe Manchin for now, since he's the one who's more in the news, although she was last week or the week before. So I will postpone her a little while, because we do actually have her birth data, but we don't have a time for Joe Manchin. But regardless, I noticed something interesting about his chart, so I thought, what the heck, let me talk about it. So when I look at the way that I do charts, his elemental and modal mix, Manchin comes out mutable cardinal fire, which is Sagittarius and Aries. And I noticed that he has a 13-degree 51 Sagittarius. Oh, we don't have his time, so actually we wouldn't know, but on either 6 degrees more or less to 1351. That's where the moon was at noon on the day he was born, which is August 24th of 1947 in Farmington. Wasn't Farmington, West Virginia? I don't know if that's where he was born. Hold on. Let me see if, it doesn't say. I don't know. I'll get that for you next time, but it's easy to Google. I'm not sure if he was born in West Virginia or not. I don't think so, but I'm not positive. Anyway, I'll get that for you. But I noticed that, like Donald Trump, he has what we call, well, let me backtrack. His dominant function means what he's most conscious about is Sagittarius and Aries, right? And so either way you slice it, because his moon comes out almost halfway through Sagittarius at noon on the day that he was born, he's a Sag moon. And a Sag moon likes to get emotionally involved in a cause, right? So it's interesting that he comes out Aries and Sag, because he's got an equal amount of fixed and mutable in his chart, but we don't know his ascendant, so it could change if we do, and more fire than air, water, or earth. So he has an inferior function, though, which is in earth. And like Donald Trump, that means that he doesn't feel weighty or substantial in this world, right? So he has to accrue things, material things, money, possessions. I do find it interesting that he lives on a houseboat, but that's another story. So without the time, I can't find the houses and the house cusp. But I wanted to mention that because I think, certain things that have been said and written about him, they asked him if he enjoyed all of this attention that he's getting because he's one of the holdouts, right, in Congress and the Senate to prevent things from happening, that all this stuff that I've been mentioning. And he said, no, I don't enjoy that. But when you look at his chart, and this should be true for the day, regardless of the time, he's got his only earth planet is Sun in Virgo at 0 degrees, 40 minutes. Then he's got Venus, Mercury, Saturn, and Pluto in Leo. This guy loves the limelight. He just likes to be humble about how much he loves the limelight. So I would say, don't let him kid you about that. And finally, the final thing I'll say before I run out of time, is that he was born in 1947 on at the beginning of the Saturn-Pluto cycle, their new synodic cycle, and that was in Leo. So he is the beginning of the baby boomer generation, as is Trump, who was born in 46, but and a host of people who are in office now, as well as parents and grandparents that we all have. So it's just very interesting because when I talked about Reagan and the Saturn Uranus cycle, Reagan was also in office in late 1982 and early 83 when the next Saturn Pluto cycle formed, which was in Libra. And now, I mentioned last week, a year and a half ago, in January of 2020, approximately, we had the next Saturn-Pluto cycle in Capricorn. So we can see how some of these things overlap. And we'll talk about this more in the future, but I just thought it was very interesting that, this is his second cycle around, right, for a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Not that I mean it's happening in his chart, but what I mean is that, he's living through a third iteration of it. He was born under one, and then there was a second one. You're right, and now there's a third one. So it's just kind of interesting. But I'll get back to him a little more, and Krysten Sinema, whose birth time we do have, as I said, when we return or in one of the shows in following weeks. So I want to thank everyone for joining me today. I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. I would encourage you, if you have any questions about anything I've said or any comments, feel free to email me. Again, my email is SHERI, SHERI, @karmicevolution.com, because I'd love to hear from you. And please be sure to join me next week on October 28th for another episode of Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. Till then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. above.